Good morning, everybody, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another property forum in our continuing series. There's a horrible picture of me, thank you. Before we start, any minute now, you'll see a poll come up. Now, this is our quarterly economic survey, and the information that we gather from this is of vital importance to both the British Chambers of Commerce and who inform central government of the outcome, and indeed Bank of England. So if you wouldn't mind just spending literally 2 minutes, and if it takes you longer than 2 minutes to do this, then you're doing it wrong. This isn't exam conditions, so please start tapping away now. You can confer and spend 2 minutes doing that. And I'm kind of hoping our esteemed speakers will also join in the polling as well. If you haven't already done so, feel free to skip any questions that aren't applicable to your company. I think a Zoom poll will allow you to do that. So please go ahead. Have we got any takers? I'll give you 1 minute on this screen and 1 minute on the next screen. Good. I think we're there. That's excellent. Thank you very much for doing that. You don't need to hear from me too much because fortunately we have a proper facilitator today, so I'm very, very pleased to introduce David Jones from Evans Jones, who will take you through the whole process. He'll probably mention it, but please do feel free to ask any questions and of course introduce yourself in the chat box. The information that we're taking today is recorded and it will be edited and uploaded to our library, which is effectively a YouTube channel, in the next sort of 48 hours. Certainly by the end of the week, we'll have something ready for people to view and indeed share with your wider client base as appropriate. So without further ado, over to you, David. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm not sure I've ever been described as an expert facilitator before, but I'll take it. Thank you very much. So thank you, Sarah. Thank you for the Chamber for inviting me to chair this event and facilitate today. We've worked closely with the Chamber over the last few years, and anybody who isn't involved with the Chamber, I would advocate that you get involved. I think the Thames Valley Chamber is a great proactive chamber who do a lot for business in the area and really, are the glue that holds us all together. So if you're not involved, I suggest you get involved. So today we're looking at what the future holds as far as any of us are able to determine or guess or crystal ball gaze. We have a range of speakers, so I'll give a quick intro from sort of my perspective, and I'll introduce myself in a moment, followed by Cathy Marshall, People Lead at And Digital, followed by Rose Smith, Senior Associate at Doyle Clayton, talking on returning to the office from a legal perspective, followed by Daniel Clements of Emapsite, and looking at what the future holds for us from a data perspective in the built landscape. So a little bit about me. My name is David Jones. I'm Managing Director of Evans Jones Limited. We operate from offices in Cheltenham, Reading and London. The practice is a multidisciplinary practice, so planning, project management, building consultancy and access consultancy. So very much dealing with projects from really inception to sort of turnkey completion. So a little bit about what we're seeing in the market. The government have been seeking to address the sort of COVID emergency and to get us building again. So we had a planning white paper in the middle of last year, and I'm sure you'll have all seen Boris in various news outlets pronouncing build, 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 build back better, build back beautiful. There's a theme there. I think for me that's still work in progress. Not that much has come out of the planning white paper in terms of hard new policies as yet. Some have, but not that much. One of the major changes I've seen is a new commercial use class, which has subsumed most business uses now into a single use class, which allows much greater flexibility, particularly in the high street, for retail uses to change to offices, gyms, professional services offices without reference to the planning authority. And from August 1st, permitted development will be extended to include conversion of those premises to residential, with some protections, but a much wider permitted development, allowing a lot of town centre uses to be converted to residential uses where certain preconditions are met, much as we've had for a while now with the office to residential conversion. But we're still coming out of a pandemic now. I'm seeing quite a mixed bag across the country. Central London and major conurbations still, very much seeing the home working mantra continue. Report in the Sunday Times this week, in central London, they're only at about 15% activity compared to pre-COVID. But the real measure, let's face it, is pret-a-manger. Within Canary Wharf, they're still only operating at about 50% of pre-COVID levels. So, there's still work to be done to address that, and still confidence to be gained. And I think other speakers will look at sort of seismic changes that will affect us and will continue to affect us, and we must all consider. What I am seeing is office users, certainly for bigger organisations, looking to reconfigure their office space. Certainly those occupiers who have occupied quite a high density, a little bit like call centres, were in the midst of reconfiguring those offices to make them much more user-friendly, smaller meeting spaces, breakout spaces, much more informal sort of drop-in centres. Now that has ramifications across the board, really. It means that there will be fewer occupants in terms of headcount within an office, but it could facilitate a business actually employing more people with this blended arrangement, which I'm sure some of the other speakers will drop onto. Within the SME market, I think there's been a tendency to, certainly outside London, probably return more readily to pre-COVID levels, and I think blended working is not so prevalent within a lot of SME markets, but perhaps it can be more fluid and didn't have the level of occupancy that other big operators did. And finally, before I move on to the speakers, I read quite an interesting article from the National Infrastructure Commission published earlier middle of last month, where they've looked at historic shocks and whether short-term shifts in behaviour are disruptive events that have long-term outcomes, or people do revert to norm. And what their research is showing is that the long-term attractiveness of flexible working to workers' employees remains unproven. And they've gone through various sort of scenarios. We return to pre-pandemic, we have a flexible future with urban centres. We have what's called low social contact urban living, so less travel, less public transport, centres used for shopping, leisure, and boosting demand for digital social cities, or virtual local reality in which we continue with the sort of COVID working arrangements. I suspect it will be a blend of all of those, and I suspect it won't be the same in every town and city. But that's probably enough of me. So if I could pass now to Kathy Marshall, so People Lead and Digital. So we'll discuss the future of the workspace, so very apt from what I've introduced. So without further ado, over to you, Kathy. Thank you.
Thank you, David, and hi everyone. As David said, I'm Kathy. I'm a people lead at Digital, where I've spent the last 4 years across a variety of different people-related roles and projects. Most recently, that's included leading the implementation of what the future of work looks like for us, kind of post-pandemic and beyond, which is something that we call blended working. So for a bit of context, kind of before I get into what blended working is and means, a bit around Digital. So we exist to accelerate our clients' digital capability, and we do that through 3 different offerings. So the first one is Guide, where our kind of consultant and consulting part of the business offer expert support to tackle kind of the toughest digital questions and drive actions around those. The second part of our offering is around Build. So actually our software engineers and business analysts working with our clients as a joint team to deliver great digital products faster. And the third offering is around, and we call it Equip, which is to upskill and develop our clients' talent for long-term sustainability of their digital products and ways of working. And we do that across a variety of locations. So the Thames Valley being one of those. We have an office based in Reading. We actually just, it's a bit of a shameless plug, just came first in the best large companies to work for in the southeast of England, which is very exciting. So our Reading office has done well there, and placed 15th overall across the UK and 6th within the best technology companies, which was a great achievement. And I think our blended working part, hopefully had a part to play in that as well. We also have a number of offices across London, so definitely a big impact based on kind of what David was saying, particularly around our offices there and what that means. And we've also got offices across Edinburgh, Manchester, Leeds, Halifax, and soon Amsterdam and Glasgow. So I was very much responding to that poll saying, yes, we have kind of increased our workforce and things are still kind of looking up, which is a very fortunate position to be in given the pandemic. So yeah, a very much a fast-paced and fast-growing company where, you know, we have a huge focus not only on delivering value to our clients, but also to maintain and enhance our people-first approach, which was definitely a driver behind why we kind of came up with blended working. And obviously the pandemic kind of sped up that thinking and forced us to act a bit quicker on actioning that. So yeah, I'm here to, I suppose, give you an example, a tangible example of what the kind of post-pandemic working looks like or could look like for some companies and what it looks like for Digital. So yeah, what do we actually mean by blended working? So I suppose context is, you know, we all know that where we work from and the way of work has fundamentally changed due to COVID-19. And this has meant that companies like Digital have had to take steps to move to a remote-based way of work, something that kind of, you know, over the last year has become what people have called the new normal. But now that restrictions are easing, companies are now having to think of kind of what the next normal will look like. And yeah, as I kind of alluded to at Digital, we saw this as an opportunity to progress our people strategy and goals sooner as we continue to kind of work out how to truly be a people-first company. So what our next normal is called blended working, which seeks to blend both the benefits we've seen from home working and the benefits of being in person. And therefore, kind of going forward, our people will be working across a blend of both in-person and remote work locations, with their day-to-day location being the one that is the most effective for the task they are doing. So what does that actually mean? It sounds a bit confusing, but I will explain it. So it means that our people will adapt their work location to the work they're carrying out. So we're planning to, we have got, and we are in progress of rolling it out as we speak. We've got central guidance which will state which locations is the most effective for certain work activities. So, for example, let's say hypothetically, I've got a collaborative kind of ideation workshop, and therefore, based on the guidance, collaboration and brainstorming is seen as the most effective when done in person. So I would then go into the office for that kind of work activity. And yet on another given day, you know, I might have just a few one-to-ones and kind of individual work to get on with. And therefore, the guidance would suggest that being at home would be the most effective place for me to carry out those activities. So basically, in summary, what that's saying is that as a company, we have defined what activities and situations are the most effective at each of the 4 different work locations. And we will shift to this way of work as and when restrictions allow. So I suppose to kind of bring that to life a little bit more, the types of activities and situations that are at these locations are, I suppose, firstly for home working. This would be, you know, for more kind of established and mature teams and projects who have less of a reliance on being in person. It's also suitable for kind of regular and routine work. At our client's location, we're saying this would be the most suitable and effective for when a new team or project is starting out, or for more kind of complex and collaborative activities, or critical activities, kind of significant kind of product go lives, let's say, or maybe difficult kind of conversations and messages. In our actual and digital offices, this would be for when our internal teams have new people or projects starting, or kind of collaboration or connection activities, as well as kind of more significant or less frequent meetings. And then the final location, which is actually a kind of new location, or at least one that we've made more formal, we've called change of scenery, which is literally what it says on the tin. We thought, why overcomplicate it? And basically it's something we'd like to offer our people should they feel like they need a change of scenery, and should it be suitable for the work they're carrying out. I suppose we don't really know what the reality of blended working is going to look like until we do it. And, you know, if it means that someone's going to be at home for 5 days in the week, we definitely appreciate that they might want to change it up. So, you know, this could be things like giving people access cards to co-working spaces, or a budget to go and work from kind of external venues such as coffee shops, who are now kind of saying, you know, buy a coffee and you can work here for the full day because we've got Wi-Fi available. And that would be suitable for when, you know, the person wants it and the work is appropriate to be done in that kind of space. And, you know, routine individual work, phone calls, individual brainstorming, that kind of thing. Now, we're definitely aware that there are plenty of nuances between individuals and teams and activities and projects. So we are saying that this guidance is a default guide. And I suppose it's there to get our people used to the essence and spirit of blended working. You know, collaboration and connection are better in person. Routine individual work is better at home. That kind of fundamental, I suppose, essence of what the guidance is saying. We also know that we can't possibly cover every activity. So we're making sure that when we roll this out, each team actually has a proper kind of alignment meeting to say, okay, this is what the guidance is saying, this is what it means, and this is what it means for us. But then also we appreciate that, you know, the pandemic isn't just going to go away overnight. This is going to have to be a kind of positional approach to rolling this out. And that, you know, phase 1 might be, this is what the guidance means to us in light of kind of restrictions still being there, but not kind of 100% gone away. And then hopefully, fingers crossed, later this year, we will be in a position where it's, you know, actually the kind of very, very minimal restrictions, and actually we can kind of perform blended working to its full ability. We're also really keen to continue to review this guidance and evolve this guidance, and we're advising teams that, you know, once every quarter they get together to decide what it looks like for them, what lessons learnt they've had from the previous quarter, and what it's going to look like going forward. So what this actually means in practical terms, which actually David kind of alluded to earlier, is I suppose we've gone through a really big contract update. It's involved a few different things, kind of separate to blended working, but I suppose one of the biggest changes was actually changing our people's place of work, which had plenty of kind of legal considerations to consider. But now that we've rolled that out, what that looks like is everyone's contract's place of work says that not only, you know, they're expected to travel to their own digital office, which is their kind of contractual place of work, and, you know, there's address in there. They're also expected to travel to their client location, which has always been in our contracts. There's kind of just parameters around the distance that they'd be expected to travel. But now it includes actually they're expected to work from home. We haven't put any kind of time or time commitment around that. It's just that under blended working, you will be carrying out work across a variety of locations, and these are them. And that's also meant that we have had to ensure everyone has a safe and comfortable homework environment. And so we've done that through giving them, every employee, you know, a budget to purchase the equipment they need, and kind of the tools and guidance and information they need to know what a safe and comfortable work environment looks like, and what equipment supports that. It's also meant that we've needed to find new offices. You know, we were spending, particularly for our London offices, a fortune on offices which now haven't been used for the last year, and we've proved that we don't need to use them all day every day. So we are kind of downsizing, reducing the amount that we actually spend on our offices, and distributing that elsewhere. For example, like the home work equipment budget that we're giving everyone, and really kind of configuring them, as David mentioned, to foster more kind of collaboration and connection, where people can come in and, you know, brainstorm or connect socially, as opposed to having a set desk and a place to work to just carry out kind of routine work. So I suppose to conclude as to kind of why we're going with this approach, I think the easiest way is to almost compare it to other options. Is, you know, for instance, do we go 100% remote? Was obviously a question. I'm sure everyone's businesses are considering that. You know, having worked remote for a year, yes, we have been able to do it, but I think we've also acknowledged that it hasn't replaced that kind of face-to-face, the value of face-to-face connection for things like, social interactions, but also collaboration or tackling really complex projects and matters. We also are a professional services company. We do work with our clients, and one of kind of the things that we sell ourselves on is that we work alongside of our clients to deliver value. And we know that, you know, building relationships and being able to work effectively with our clients does require some in-person working. But on the other hand, it doesn't need to go back to how we used to work, which was, you know, 4 or 5 days in the office. It's actually, some of those activities can be done at home because they've been just as effective over the past year. We also didn't want to take away, you know, the greater work-life balance that our people have expressed since becoming fully remote. But equally, you know, there's come other well-being challenges of not having that connection and sense of belonging and identity that an office does provide. We were also really keen to not call this flexible working. You know, there is going to be central guidance. It isn't do what you want, where you want, when you want. And that's partly because we work with clients. I think companies that have kind of an in-house product probably have more flexibility with that. But we do need to work with a large portfolio of clients who have kind of different needs and wants. So, you know, the argument is why wouldn't they go offshore if they're going to be working with a company that is 100% remote? Which I can provide also many reasons why they shouldn't and why they should go with digital, but that's, you know, definitely a consideration we had to take. And also this relies on the success of teams, not individuals. You know, we could say work from wherever you want, but actually that's a complete kind of individual mindset and approach, whereas we see the value in high performing teams and then the need for them to be aligned. This also means, and this kind of relates to, I suppose, our office space, is that people can't work from anywhere. You know, people have been asking, can I go and work from nice, you know, overseas destinations? I'm from New Zealand and would love to be there right now, given the state of the pandemic there is a fair bit better. But unfortunately, you know, we are saying you need to be within a commutable distance. What a commutable distance is completely subjective and up to the individual, but they will need to be able to do some in-person working as and when the work they're doing requires it. There's not to say it won't happen in the future. You know, this is phase one of our kind of evolution in the space. It'd be amazing to get to a place where we've got, you know, a really large company and a large portfolio of clients that allow us to be that extra level of flexible. But I think right now this is a great phase one to kind of test and prove what works, show that we can still deliver value and still look after our people and our culture at the same time. And the final point is, yeah, we also didn't want to define the number of days kind of in the office or at home. I think lots of companies are going down the route of, we're going to do 2 days at home, 2 days in the office. But I think the whole kind of reason behind blended working was that it's providing reason and purpose behind a work location. So it's actually saying, you know, the reason you're going into the office today is because it is the most effective place for that work to happen. I think a lot of our people are saying, you know, we used to work this way. What was actually the reason behind going into the office 4 or 5 days a week? And actually, what's the reason that we wouldn't go back to, remain being 100% remote? So we're trying to provide some kind of meaning and purpose behind what actually your work location means. So that's all from me in terms of kind of what blended working is, how we're doing it, and why we're doing it, and it's hopefully given a kind of tangible real life example of post-pandemic working. It's kind of only one example, and definitely one that we're hoping will work for digital. What may not work for other companies, but I think the kind of essence is something that we're keen to kind of share with others.
Thank you, Kathy.
Thanks very much.
Really, really good. There's some questions coming through in the chat, and anybody who'd like to ask a question, please just type it in the chat and I will ask at the appropriate time. A couple for you, Kathy. Nicole asked whether there were any guidelines outlined in some sort of policy accessible to staff, sort of a hybrid working policy. Is that something you've worked on and, you know, have for staff?
Yes, so the guidelines themselves aren't a policy. It is, I suppose, you could argue it's a policy because people in their contract are now saying, you know, you need to work across a blend of locations, so they are effectively obligated to uphold that guidance. We have put some things into a policy, but such as, you know, home working and what are expected of people and things, but the guidance themselves is kind of a document. But I suppose, as I kind of mentioned, it's quite hard to be quite prescriptive around what the actual guidance is. So we're more saying this is a default, this is what we're expecting people to uphold, kind of spirit and essence, but actually every team needs to apply that to themselves, which is partly why it hasn't been a policy. The other kind of part to that is we as a company are trying not to just put everything into a policy for policy's sake, and instead just trying to, you know, create a cultural shift around how we think about where we work and the way we work. So hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, brilliant. I think there are a few questions on perhaps more the social aspect of, I think from my perspective, I see home working really well for those who've got space, but it could be a bit socially divisive for those who live in very small properties, and some of the questions have sort of echoed that if you haven't got the space to home work, and also touching on insurance as well. So almost two questions in one there, but one, how you deal with the sort of social aspect where somebody may not have an appropriate working environment at home, and perhaps second, whether you've looked at the insurance implications of home working and how that whether it has any implications for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So with the one around, I don't have the right kind of space or environment to be working from home, we definitely recognise that up front as a potential challenge. And we actually ran a pilot where we sort of tested the guidance and how receptive people were to blended working and what their responses were. And one of the things we wanted to test was, what's the response to saying home working is now kind of contractual part of where you work. And actually it was very minimal numbers who responded with that. Most people were really pleased that they get to work from home more often, and that we're not just saying, come back into the office, back to kind of how we used to do things. But for those who do have those challenges, there's sort of two ways we're looking at this. One, for new people, we are setting that expectation up front. Whilst we do not want to limit the talent that we can bring into the company, we don't think it's going to be a kind of major blocker in getting people to join us. And we think it's going to be hopefully minimal people that are saying, I don't quite have the space. For our existing employees, and potentially for people that we really want to bring into the business who are saying that's an issue, we've just said that we'll deal with that on a case-by-case basis. The pilot also suggested kind of what the use of our digital offices were. And, if they're applying that lens of collaboration and connection, it was suggesting that there was only kind of minimal numbers throughout the week who are doing more collaborative activities. And then when you apply that connection lens, the kind of Friday numbers did go up a bit. I think people still are wanting those Friday after work drinks, which we don't want to take away if it's what they want and kind of helps them feel connected to the company. So yeah, I think there is scope for us to find alternative solutions, but we will just have to put a bit more thought and thinking behind that. But I think it will be a minimal disruption in terms of that. And if it is a kind of big disruption, I think it's something we'll just have to see how we go, and kind of adapt as and when it becomes a bigger issue. And then in terms of insurance, so it's definitely not my area of expertise. We did kind of engage with our company insurers. From a home perspective, everyone has laptops and those are covered under our company insurance anyway. And then in terms of kind of health and safety at home, as I'm sure everyone's aware, insurance isn't super clear cut and easy to understand. But from our perspective, we are just creating a safe and comfortable work environment through the right kind of ergonomic setup and equipment. And the rest is kind of the individual and their own home insurance, but not something that would affect us as a company. Obviously, we don't want our people to be in danger, but there's always, that's kind of, someone falling down the stairs, for example, or leaving their toaster on and a fire starting could happen irrespective of whether they're working at home or not. So it's not something our insurance company says it's not something we need to worry about. What we do need to worry about is just providing a safe and comfortable setup. And how we've done that is, give them that budget, give them a training course on how they need to sit, give them links to kind of all the equipment they should be buying that's kind of ergonomically safe. And then everyone has a call with their HR person to see their setup, talk it through, talk how to use it. And then obviously there's scope to come back should it not be working.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you for that. There are some further questions, but time is marching on. So we are recording the session and the chat. So anything we don't get an opportunity to answer, then we can come back to you. Anybody, please, I say use the chat, even if we don't get an opportunity to come back today. We can certainly come back to you later. So if I can now hand over to Rose Smith, Senior Associate at Doyle Clayton. So returning to work, the key employment law concerns. So thank you, Rose.
Thanks, David. So I'm, as David has said, I'm Rose Smith. I work for Doyle Clayton, and Doyle Clayton, for those who aren't familiar, is a workplace advisory specialist law firm. So we really focus on the employment relationship and ancillary sort of legal advice as well. So we cover employment law, but also immigration, a bit of corporate law, a bit of regulatory law, and some sort of financial crime and regulatory work as well. And I'm based out of our Canary Wharf office, but we also have an office in the City of London and also a large office in Reading. And so today I'm just going to talk about the three key elements for everyone going back to their normal place of work as lockdown starts to ease and we go back to what we used to consider normal. And the three key elements that I'm certainly seeing come up are the idea of there being no jab, no job, which I'm sure lots of you have seen in the news, the objections that we're receiving from employees in respect to returning to the workplace, and flexible working requests. So let's start by looking at no jab, no job. And everyone's probably seen this fairly headline grabbing phrase from Pimlico Plumbers boss Charlie Mullins, which has been mentioned in the papers quite a lot over the past few months. So what's the reality of the situation? Can we actually make this a rule? And I think the answer to that is everyone's pretty much picked up on. It's quite unlikely. Possibly in certain sectors, we might be able to make vaccination compulsory. And I believe that the government's been considering this for NHS workers over the past few weeks. But really, there are so many individual considerations for doing so that the considerations are going to have to be so much on a case-by-case basis that a blanket rule that you have to have the vaccination in order to continue to have your job is unlikely to be applicable to most employers. And actually, Mr. Mullins did accept that when he made his statement first time round. So I think it's worth reminding ourselves, of course, we do have a reasonable duty of care to look after the health and safety of employees. And I think the question is whether that extends to insisting upon vaccination or something else. And I think probably it won't extend to insisting upon the vaccination of employees. But it would extend possibly to making sure that staff are informed about the advantages of vaccination and indeed the disadvantages, and making sure that they have that information. And it may be something that you consider your workforce has the information they need around it anyway. But if you're perhaps coming across an area of your workforce that is not having access to that kind of information, then it may be something that you consider if there's a impartial but informative way of distributing that information. And the first question, if you were trying to think about whether you would be able to enforce this, is whether there is a contractual requirement for employees to be vaccinated. And that's highly unlikely. It would need to be explicitly set out in the contract of employment. It would be incredibly prescient of employers to have thought of that before, obviously, this global pandemic that took us all rather by surprise. And I've certainly never seen an employment contract that requires vaccination. But a non-contractual policy encouraging voluntary vaccination is going to be much more likely to be workable and to be a workable situation to put in place. But it is going to require some level of conversation with your employees and perhaps consultation with trade union representatives if you've got them, and support to make sure that the communications are sensitive and unbiased but informative and accurate. I think the underlying point on vaccination is that to force staff to have a vaccination is a significant interference with their private life under the European Convention on Human Rights. So it's a potential interference with a fundamental human right. And so you have to really think carefully as to whether you've got a reasonable and proportionate basis for interfering in that way. And I think it's going to be very difficult to argue that you do, particularly when there could be rapid testing. There are other measures that we can take: social distancing, hand sanitizer, ventilation, PPE. We know them all very well now. All of those measures would really diminish the need for compulsory vaccination. And the fact that there's going to be a significant proportion of the workforce who take the vaccination voluntarily anyway, it's going to mean that insisting upon it compulsorily for certain people is simply going to be disproportionate, and it's going to be unlikely that you can interfere with that particular right to a private life. The other thing we always have to think about with blanket policies, so for example, a blanket policy to encourage vaccination, is that blanket policies can disadvantage certain groups of people, and disadvantaging certain groups of people can lead to discrimination claims. So if you were to put in place a policy that disadvantages a particular group, then they could say that that indirectly discriminates against them. So that would be applicable where certain people haven't had the vaccine yet for protected characteristics. So the key one being age. It's being rolled out over certain age groups, and there are going to be members of your workforce that haven't had it yet because they haven't, their age group has not been covered yet. So disadvantaging them because they can't be vaccinated is a disadvantage linked to their age. Also, obviously, health considerations. If people are not being vaccinated, perhaps because they've got an immunosuppressant disorder, that could amount to a disability, and they are protected from discrimination on the basis of that as well. And so a blanket policy, again, could disadvantage them in that way. And then I think those are two quite obvious examples, but there are others. So in particular, religion or belief. So lots of vaccines are actually manufactured using gelatin, which is of course derived from pigs. And so perhaps practicing Muslims might not be prepared to take vaccine on that basis, or vegan employees might not be prepared to take a vaccine on that basis. And so, you need to think cautiously around that. And the fact that some religions don't believe in vaccination at all because it interferes in divine providence. So it's definitely something that we have to think about quite cautiously. And whilst you might put in place a policy, again, you're going to have to think on a case-by-case basis as to whether you can relax that for particular individuals if they're suffering a disadvantage as a result of it. And it's not just a policy around requiring vaccination or encouraging vaccination that we need to be cautious of. It's any policies that are perhaps rewarding the fact that certain staff are vaccinated. So perhaps you might start thinking about introducing away days or socials or even in-person overtime, and you're only allowing that for people who've been vaccinated. You're going to have to think very carefully about it, because of course that gives a benefit to people who've been vaccinated, and there may be people who've not been vaccinated on the basis of protected characteristics that you'll need to give some careful thought to. So that sort of deals with no jab, no job. And I think the next thing that's coming up is a little bit more nebulous, and that's people who are a little bit anxious or perhaps even getting to the point of refusing to return to the workplace, even as we're seeing lockdown ease and things open up a lot more. And the main causes of that seem to be a degree of vaccine hesitancy, so a sort of concern that they're not going to get the vaccine and are feeling a little bit exposed because of that, or a more general anxiety about returning to work and not feeling safe. A key part of this is going to be communication, I would say, and I think you need to really get to the bottom of why people are reluctant to return to work. And what we've seen employed to really quite good effect is staff surveys or conversations. I think if you're dealing with a larger workforce, then staff surveys really help have sort of a really good way of gathering the anonymous thoughts of staff around how they feel about coming back to work and what their key considerations are. And so you can address them. So if they think, well, actually, if you're hearing a lot of, well, actually, we think the office is a bit overcrowded, then you can think about what steps you might take. Do you want to keep having a sort of staged workforce so that there's certain people in the office at certain times, or think about being able to spread out and get a bit more space or use your space differently. And it'll give you a feel for those who might have sort of slightly more fundamental concerns about returning to the office that are going to be more difficult to deal with. But certainly getting that survey done and getting a feel for what the concerns are gives you the chance to address them. And then I think the next step is going to be a communication of why you say your workplace is safe. What measures have you put in place? It may be that you're assuring them that you've done what the government recommends, or it may be that you're going above and beyond that, or inviting their input into what might make them feel safe. So definitely give a bit of thought to that. But that's an absolutely crucial, the absolutely crucial part of that is communication. However, and there's always a however with lawyers, I'm afraid, but one thing that we do need to think very carefully about, again, is the risk of indirect discrimination. And if we are sort of insisting on return to work, whether that might be risking unfairness or discrimination. So any employee with more than 2 years service is protected from unfair dismissal. And so if they're treated to a degree that they say is extremely unfair, they could actually resign and claim for constructive unfair dismissal. And any employee from day one, even job applicants, is protected from discrimination. So pretty much from day one, you need to be absolutely alive to the fact that blanket policies or very, very rigid rules with regards to returning to the office are going to be something that could send you down a route of having some litigation risk or legal risk in terms of claims. And that can be sort of mitigated by being very cautious about really drilling down into what the reasons for refusing to return to the office might be, and whether you can assess them on a case-by-case basis. So I think the stage process is certainly to start with more blanket communications, figure out what the general consensus on concerns are, seek to address those. And if anyone, having heard those sort of mitigation of the risk and the safe plan that you're planning for the return to the workplace, still has concerns, I think you want to be meeting with them and really drilling down into what those concerns are. And once you do that, and once you get a real flavour for why they're returning, you can perhaps help with information and informing them and addressing the concerns that they might have. And if they arise from perhaps a protected characteristic, thinking about how they can be addressed, perhaps if there's an underlying disability, should there be reasonable adjustments made for this person's working arrangements. But if there's no basis to them, and if this person is unreasonably refusing to come back to the workplace, then at that stage we can start saying, well, actually, you're now talking about being AWOL, you're talking about not following a reasonable management instruction to get back to work, and we can start looking down the route of taking disciplinary action if we need to. It is a heavy-handed route, but it is something that's open to employers should things go awry, and if there's no real basis for this staff member not returning to work. Now, one example that we've seen quite recently is a refusal to return to the workplace because a parent has not been able to secure childcare arrangements. They're waiting for a nursery place and it hasn't come through yet. And that was a really interesting one because we immediately think, when we hear childcare, we think we've got to be a bit cautious here. This is an issue that, regardless of shared parental leave and progressive employers, does for the most part affect more women than men, and certainly female employees. So have we got a risk here of taking a position in respect of childcare and insisting upon return to the office, but there's an underlying childcare concern, and going down a risk of indirect discrimination on the basis of gender? But I think we can be somewhat more robust, because childcare is something that really should have been in place even when working from home. And so waiting for a nursery place, I would have a big question mark over whether that person has not had their child in childcare and has been working from home whilst also doing full-time childcare arrangements, which of course is concerning in terms of their being able to undertake their role, if that's not something they've been able to agree with their employer in the past. But secondly, really, childcare is something that is the responsibility of parents. And so whilst we need to act reasonably and give that parent time to put in place reasonable sort of short-term measures whilst they're waiting for a place at nursery or at their chosen nursery. It's not something that has to be put up with ad infinitum. So it's certainly something that there's going to be basis for saying, well, this can't go on forever. You've not got carte blanche, but we want to hear from you on a case-by-case basis as to why the return can't happen. And there comes a point where we can put our foot down, just keeping in mind that there are those potential discrimination risks. So then just moving on to flexible working requests, and these are something that employees with more than 26 weeks of service can apply for if they do so in writing and meet certain statutory criteria. So things like setting out exactly what they want in writing and explaining when they propose that the new form of hours will start. Now, flexible working is not quite as dynamic and agile as what Kathy just described to us, and generally speaking tends to be much more of a fixed pattern of perhaps non-regular hours, so longer days on some days of the week, shorter days on other days of the week, or working from home arrangements, or a combination of both. But it would tend to be a pattern that remained in place once the application was successful. And as I say, employees do have the right to apply for it, and they can apply for it every 12 months, regardless of the outcome of their previous application. Now, that's a little bit of a red herring, perhaps, and it can be a bit confusing, because if an employee makes an application for flexible working in a more informal way, you might be tempted to think, oh, great, that's much easier for us to deal with than a statutory flexible working request. We'll have a think about it, we'll make our decision, done and dusted. But actually that can be really frustrating, because you can get to a situation where you deal with the informal application and then the employee makes a statutory compliant application within a couple of weeks, and you are left having to deal with that because they haven't made a statutory application in the last 12 months. So what I would suggest is if applications are coming in, is to make sure that they meet the statutory criteria. So speak to the employee in question and say, do you want to make this under your statutory rights? And if so, it needs to meet these criteria, just so that you're not in a situation where you have to deal with another application from them in 12 months' time if they don't get exactly what they want, or indeed if they change their minds about what they want, because that just it can be quite a laborious and difficult thing to manage. Now, that's not to say you can't, from time to time, as sort of changes might be requested, deal with them on an informal basis and make the changes to the working patterns that have been requested. But it's just knowing that you have the security of not having yet another formal statutory flexible working application in rapid succession of already having thought about it. Now, in their application, employees don't actually have to give a reason for making their flexible working application, but you do need to give a reason if you're turning it down. But there are statutory reasons for doing so, and it can just be as simple as performance or ability to meet customer demands. They're the two reasons for turning down applications that we see the absolute most of. And I think things are becoming a little bit more open. I think, having had obviously 15 months of experience of working from home and working in a little bit more of a flexible way, that I think businesses are going to be hopefully quite open to flexibility of workspace. And it's certainly something that you can have a conversation with the employee if what they've requested is not quite something the business is prepared to agree, but there might be something else that they can get to. Then you might want to speak to that employee about what the purpose is. Though they don't have to tell you, you could say, it will help us to come up with a compromise if you're able to share with us what the purpose of your flexible working request is. Now, the slight caveat to that, and what's an interesting point, is what you shouldn't be doing is making a value judgment as to what is or is not a good reason for flexible working. And that can come up in situations where perhaps you're considering more than one flexible working request, which might conflict against another. So perhaps two people asking for the same thing and you can't accommodate them both doing it. And it can be tempting to think, well, we must do the right thing here and select the person who's asking for perhaps a flexible working arrangement to deal with family care above someone who's made a flexible working request because they like to go fishing on a Friday afternoon. And actually it's not your place there to make a value judgment as to which request is more valid. You're really just drilling down into reasons so that you can accommodate as best you can the pattern of working that they're after. Now, what I think we're going to see is something that I just touched on, which is the idea of having multiple flexible working requests that perhaps conflict with one another, and making sure that you make the decision fairly as to who gets what they are requesting. And first of all, certainly having a conversation with both is going to help to get to the bottom of perhaps a good compromise. But secondly, if it does get to the point that you have to choose between one or the other, then please make sure you're doing so in a way in which there is no bias or discrimination, so drawing names out of a hat or something along those lines. What I think we're really going to see is, as offices start to reopen and workplaces start to reopen, is every single member of the workforce considering a flexible working request at the same time. And that's somewhat unprecedented. It tends to be as people's lifestyles and sort of personal arrangements change, then perhaps they're making their requests, and it's a lot more fluid. I think we're going to see large blocks of applications, and what we may well see is that people start to address that at different points, but certainly over the next few months. So there is a logistical risk of getting a load of dribs and drabs of applications that may impact one another over the next few months. And so rather than playing that kind of human Tetris game of we deal with these applications and then suddenly a whole load more come in and we've got to fit those into the cracks of what we've already agreed to, it might be helpful, again, perhaps using a staff survey to figure out what staff are after and what kind of patterns you're going to see over the whole workforce. It may well be worth suggesting to staff that a block application is made and that you'd like everyone to apply within a particular timescale so that we can deal with them all together, giving everyone the best possible chance of success of the outcome that they desire. Because obviously if they leave it but are contemplating it in a few months' time, there's going to be other people who've successfully made their applications, and that might make it difficult to grant their applications. And it also means that it perhaps is easier for you to manage. So that's certainly something that we've seen employers do to great effect, and to start managing that application. So it's certainly something that you should be aware of, certainly something that we need to be thinking is going to come in and getting ahead of. And as with the other two sort of hot topics, there is that underlying caveat to all of it, which is to say that there is always a risk when implementing blanket policies or having to exercise discretion of any kind, that people with protected characteristics could say that this is really disadvantaging them because of their protected characteristic, and therefore there's a discriminatory element to the decision that's been made. So just be very aware of that when thinking about granting any applications for flexible working, or indeed turning them down. And I think that sort of sums up what I can say in the time allotted for what we've got. But I wonder if any questions have come in. I've not seen any.
Thank you, Rose. I mean, I guess from me, and there's some questions in the chat, and I'm aware of sort of time marching on, so I don't want to run through too many of those without giving Daniel his chance. I guess from me, we're seeing, I guess not much has come through to tribunal yet, so you know it is still largely unknown, and I guess most employers have been pretty reasonable, and it's only now that we get to a stage where there may be a little bit more pressure to bring people back into the office. But I guess if the employee is performing well and meeting their targets, then that's going to be quite a difficult ask. And you know, I know anecdotally, a lot of people are finding home workers are more effective, more efficient, and turn out more work. So. Yeah,
I think that's a really good point, actually, because before going, it's going to depend what's in their contract of employment. And before going into the lockdown and all the measures we've been through in respect of COVID-19, the vast majority of workers had a place of work and didn't have any flexibility for working from home. And it's been agreed on a very much a temporary basis to deal with an emergency, you know, and we have quite a lot of discretion as employers to say, actually, no, you need to be in the office, and the reasoning for doing so can be, it doesn't have to be sort of gold plated and completely watertight. It just has to be a genuine reason. And so whilst employees may be productive from home, there may be other reasons why you want them in the office. It may be as simple as actually we're finding that some staff really struggle to be alone at home and working from home, and we're not getting that cohesive team spirit that we wanted. That's an important part of our culture, and it's something we want to have in place, and so we want people to be working from the office. So unless it's in their contract that specifically they're entitled to work from home, there is quite a lot of discretion for saying no, it's not permitted. Now, the softer side of that, and obviously I've dealt with the legalese of it and the legal side, the softer side of it is staff morale. And if you're saying to someone who has been incredibly productive that they can't have the working pattern that they choose because you want them in the office all of the time, then their nose is going to be a bit out of joint, and they're going to be saying, look, I can work perfectly well from home, and more concerningly, X company over there will pay me to do so off I go. So you've got to think about obviously the staff retention and the softer points as well as the legal elements to it. But certainly that argument of, well, I've been doing it productively for the last 12 months won't necessarily get someone to an entitlement to work from home, but it may obviously bring in that softer argument.
That's a fair comment, actually, because it can often be the case that individuals will mentor or bring on graduates, which is much more difficult at home, but a key part of the role. So they may be more efficient because they're not doing that. Yeah, and something we've seen is definitely the idea of sort of working around people who are perhaps more senior and learning, obviously, by conversations in which you're discussing, you know, you're actually getting advice, you're actually saying this is how things are done, but you also learn a little bit by osmosis and hearing by other people do things and how they deal with perhaps difficult situations or things like that. So that's a key element to encouraging return. Thank you, Rose. Really informative. If we can now move on to Daniel Clements, Sales Manager at Emapsite, who will give us a commentary on more technical matters, I feel. Daniel, over to you.
Well, let me just get the technology working first. So hopefully that should be a full screen for you all, David. Is that right?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Excellent. So yes, my name's Daniel Clements and I work for Emapsite. And before I talk about Emapsite, I'm going to talk about a few other things to get you thinking through the morning. So I'm going to stay away from the COVID as much as I can and working from home. But that image was taken last year when we were in first lockdown and I had to work out of a loft. And if you remember, April and May last year was boiling hot. And I sat on a camping table was my desk. So I'm very pleased to say I've invested in a proper chair and a proper desk, and I can properly work from a proper space in my home now. And as a company, we've gone through a big transition with the whole working from home as well as being back in the office. And we've done a big full refit of the office and starting to think about how we transition people back into the office. But I'll cover more of that in a second. So I'm going to just talk about me for a second. An intro to prop tech is a word that you may have heard around the industry for some time. And a little bit about Emapsite, less of a sales pitch, more about particular data sets that will kind of get you thinking and protect your assets, protect your clients in the future. So a little bit about me. I'm a sales guy ultimately, but I've worked within the land and property market for 20 years across all sectors, but mainly commercial and residential. If you're on the commercial side of the industry, you may have heard of a title called Estate Gazette, and I was the data guy there. I worked on the data product, EGI. That was a very new element of the industry then, understanding comparable data, the infancy. We used to go out to sales meetings and get people to have to turn on their computers at the wall first before they actually looked at data. So we've moved a long way in that sense. Then I've spent 5 years I needed to have that work-life balance from a personal point of view. So I worked with a number of prop tech companies to help them start their journey in helping them in what they're trying to provide to the marketplace. One of which was a year in a conveyancing product and that legal transaction, and hopefully trying to improve the efficiencies of that transaction. And that's kind of helped me where I am today, working now at Emapsite, which I'll talk about more in a second. But a little bit about me outside of work. I'm stuck at a desk most of the day, so I like to get outside when I can. And I've thoroughly enjoyed the empty roads that we've had last year when everybody was sitting at home. I could get out on the road any time of day and be on my bike. But that's me. So you may have heard this buzzword of prop tech and what it actually means. And there is a huge array of prop tech software data providers. You may have heard about it in the design and build side of things in terms of energy efficiency and improving the workspace. My background is more that big data and that software side of things. I'm a sales guy. I've worked for a number of these companies, and it must be an absolute minefield for you guys to decide, in a way, which horse to back. Where shall I invest my time and products to invest in? What's the risk of those going under in a year or two's time? So I don't work for these businesses anymore, but I've worked for a number of them. So if I can support and help you outside of this session, please reach out to me and I'll try and give you as much advice as I can. Not Emapsite related, but I'll help you where possible. A lot of these products are looking at site finding, bringing to life that HMLR data, understanding title ownership to enable you to find opportunities. But equally, and if you take nothing away from this, just think about the data in which that you look after in-house. Look after your client information, your own internal systems. And I remember asking the question probably 4 or 5 years ago when I was presenting for the RICS, and we asked the room who has like a CRM system, and one person put their hand up in a whole room of people. Nobody knew what a CRM system was. Nobody had thought about cyber security and protecting their data. So just take away and think about the information that you're storing on your customers, your opportunities, and hopefully it's not on the back of a fag packet, in your head, or on an Excel spreadsheet. Prop tech isn't going to go away. There's huge investment, millions around the world, to improve the efficiencies of the real estate sector. So it's not going to go away, but it's trying to work out which horse to back and trying to understand where should I invest in my business to get into the right products and right services to support me. And my one tiny link to other conversations that have been in the panel is how we entice people back to the office. So we've done a refit, but the big question, and I asked the sort of panel to sort of cover it maybe later, is what about things like the technology? I'm sitting in an empty room in my son's bedroom and I can talk freely and openly as much as I wish. But me bringing a sales team back to the office and having everybody on Teams, is the design of the office really equipped for that? We haven't got the space to have one desk for one person and spread ourselves out. We haven't got the opportunity to have sound booths, so that making it a positive experience back to the office to enable them to do their job day to day, and or do we invest in other facilities to make it more of a collaborative environment? And one big industry in this prop tech space that's needing to transform, and hopefully people will agree, is that legal industry, that legal sector and that conveyancing workflow. I was lucky enough to experience that myself briefly, and where kind of Emapsite and other data providers are helping the property professional is get access to that information up front, much earlier in the transaction, before it gets to the conveyancing side and before they find those problems much further down the line, which I'll come on to in a little bit more. So I'm not isolating and picking out anybody, but I believe you should be driving your business with data in mind. Data should be that driver. So pulling out a couple of examples of these kind of prop tech providers. If I press the right button, sorry, excuse me. If there's property developers in the room, property owners, understanding real estate average housing prices or planning applications or commercial property transactions, there's so much data available to you. And the impact of investing in a small amount of money to access the data to make your big £1 million decision on an investment, you should be making sure data drives those decisions. So there's HMLR data, the land registry data is much more freely available through these platforms now. And understanding, you know, future planning applications, there's a big drive in the government to build more homes, building homes on greenbelt areas. You thought you purchased the most beautiful dream home ever before, and then there's 4,000 units being built around you. I know that 'cause my partner is having that issue right now. Just making sure that you as an individual, you as a company, are looking at the data that's freely available or purchased to support your business decisions. So that's a little introduction to the world of PropTech, and happy to share and talk about that in more detail. But just to kind of link to my day job, Emapsite has been going for 20 years. It's a ordnance survey data partner. We've got an array of data sets that we produce and bring to life for customers like you to support your decisions. That can be anything from underground assets, which I'm going to talk about in a second, and then looking at the land itself in terms of contaminated land to flood risk, and then looking at the buildings on those sites. So we work with an array of customers, from housing associations to asset owners to waste management companies. They all need the data to support their next business decision. They might wanting to acquire, dispose, from a ground maintenance point of view, from leaks, you know, a lot of utility companies we work with, and even work with the police, understanding the road networks and traffic speed data. There's so much data that's readily available that we package up, where the experts are bringing data to life and enabling you to make that business decision. And I've got a little quiz, and I'll probably pick on David at the end for my renewables questionnaire at the end. So the kind of data companies that we work with, all credible sources, but Ordnance Survey probably underpins all that data. But from a renewable company to asset owners, will be accessing things like the address data, understanding address points. And if you imagine going into the renewable sense, a big wind turbine that's being developed, you know, you have to think about all the addresses, all the potential houses that could be affected by that development. So there's lots and lots of data that's around. Homing in on a few things in a second, but I'm guessing we've got people here that are on the architect, on the design side. So you'd be wanting to take the data into like a CAD format, specialist design software, even GIS in terms of your asset owners, ground maintenance, making sure you're cutting the right grass on your land, to box standard planning application. You know, if I want to put an extension on my house like you would be, you would need to understand and have an ordnance survey plan to enable you to submit that to the local authority. Still quite an archaic process in some of that sense, but we support that kind of original data finding. Now, Sarah, you mentioned there was a number of local authority people that could be on this call. So we have a partnership with the PSGA, used to be called the PSMA. So any local authority, government body can access ordnance survey data for free. So if you're a subcontractor working on behalf of these organisations, then we basically charge a small handling fee for you to be able to access that data. If you ever have needed to work with local authorities and knowing how difficult it is to get the data that you want in the format that you want it, that's where we come in, that we can support and facilitate that access to data. Most recently, I've done a project with the MOD, which is hugely exciting, but it's just enabling them to access the data in a much cleaner, easier way. I'm not going to dwell on this too much. I've mentioned it before in terms of your box standard PDF site plans. People use these for your Rightmove listings, to your property brochures, to your planning applications, but just be aware that we've got those kind of PDF drawings on here. But the main things I really want to talk about that will get you thinking is things what are going on underground. Now, you all live in a house or live in a flat and work to a degree in offices. But if you've got an estate of properties, you are doing any kind of development work, you need to understand those utility assets that could affect breaking ground and how that would impact you. So I'm going to whiz through a few slides that kind of bring this together. So everybody can look at a field and think, brilliant, perfect opportunity to develop a piece of, put a number of units on that property. But the impact financially and safety wise, you need to be considering that. So you can access the data, but you need to be thinking of safety, and there's lawyers on the call that will sort of support this, financially, efficiencies and time. So just to not scare you, but the impact of breaking ground, breaking a pipe, breaking a burst water main, that financial and safety impact to you as an individual, to your company from a financial point of view, you need to be considering. This isn't to scare you, but there are data that support what's going on underground. We've got the utility reports, there are other providers, but you can access and understand what piping work is going on under that development. So if you are developers, investors, or anybody involved in that development of a site, you need to be understanding that underground asset. From an insurance point of view, I'll highlight it and take a breath, but please take a read of that if you can. But there will be a big financial implication from if you do break ground, not just health and safety, but from a financial point of view into your own cost of that development, which can have a detrimental impact to you. Naturally, having access to all the information in one place is going to speed up that project and speed up that design work that you're working on, not just as a PDF output, but understanding it in a digital format, understanding where all the cables and pipes are, and that could have a massive impact to your development. And then normally, when I was in the conveyancing process, the lawyer would request a utility report, and then 2 years of projects is blowing the project out of the water. Nowadays, people are looking at these sites, looking at these implications and risks much earlier in the process, so they can get it right before it goes through the conveyancing transaction. And then last thing I want to cover off from a utilities point of view is that legality risk. I haven't gone into huge detail. I haven't got the time to go into the deep dive of utility reports, but there are webinars that we do and have recorded with our supplier of utility reports if you want a 30-minute introduction to all the different suppliers and all the different benefits of this data set. And not to scare you even more, but and I purposely picked outside of the Thames Valley, but anybody recognize where this is? David, I'll pick on you just so I can see you. Anybody know?
Us.
Okay. So I've stayed outside of the Thames Valley just to not worry you too much, but this is Bristol. And this is Bristol as it stands now, with these blue areas around it in terms of groundwater flooding of risk of today. If we fast forward a few years and we look at kind of 2050, it's materially different. But if I'm investing and looking at Bristol, I'm going to want to know this. And that risk of flood into your development, your site, on an isolated individual opportunity, we've seen the news every year. There's flooding, and people have been affected it on a personal level, on a business level. So understanding that risk of any types of flooding, but groundwater flooding that you think is safe. Big parts of London have got big risks of groundwater flooding. So just consider this as a risk. I've kind of then, again, stayed out of the Thames Valley for a second and just looked at London. And these are all the local boroughs of London. And this is the proportion of properties that are at risk of flooding of present day. So it's okay. If you look through the years at 2050, and if I'm a local authority and I'm developing out stock in those locations, I'm going to want to consider the risk of flooding in the future. So it's kind of doubled, and then it kind of materially grows again. So your portfolio of investment next 15, 20 years, that risk in the future, looking at flood and implications of flood. You've got the freely available like EA data, but there's data providers like Ambiental that we work with. They're able to model the future of flood risk. And that has a big impact to your own properties just as much as your business opportunities. And then just to kind of link from Bristol to London and across the country, this is just a high level kind of view across the UK. So naturally some areas have no risk of flooding. I, lucky enough, live on a hill, so I've got no risk of flooding. My roof leaks for other reasons, but it doesn't flood for groundwater. But across the country, that volume of rain, that volume of development that we're building out on land, that implication of average properties of risk of flooding needs to be kind of looked at. And there's much more kind of government awareness around this now, looking at potential sites, looking at potential flood risk. So I think this will become more and more of a kind of talking point in the future. So my last two slides, because conscious of time. This is my first one, just for fun. Get you thinking. Can you name in your head, I could pick on people, but I won't today, what are all these sources of renewable energy? And I'll give myself a breather. So you've all got it now. I bet you've got all the answers right. So first, as you know, it's solar energy. I think it's vital that we're kind of considering, and we support a lot of renewable companies, but we have to consider our own buildings, how we make them more energy efficient at home, to our business workplace. Look at the pressure we put on the country, but now we're kind of reducing our car emissions, getting that work-life balance. Can we improve our way of working by reducing our miles in the car? But anyway, solar energy, you've got your wind energy, tidal energy, and then probably maybe struggling at the bottom, you've got your hydro and geothermal energy. So this is the basis. And if you look at, I think it was Boris's announcement that he wants a percentage of properties across the country to be more solar energy and using wind energy much more. So these renewable sources are going to come more and more and more kind of prominent in our kind of development and build design work. And then finally, biomass. And my last statement for you all is live green, love green, and think green energy. So at the start, think about the data that you've got in your own systems and how you're managing and protecting that data. And then also think of the future, flood risk, all kinds of data sets, I know, but just think about how you can protect your assets going forward. That's me. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Daniel. That's really useful. I think, so we've got a few minutes left. I use Emapsite and I'm familiar with your data. Very, very good it is too. One thing that chimed with me, I'm dealing with a site currently, which was offered to a client of mine with planning permission. During the due diligence phase, we discovered it had a high pressure gas main through the middle of it, which rather prevented the planning permission being implemented. So, you know, probably caused or will cause 6 to 8 month delay in the process, because the whole planning has to be reworked, and that's something that could so easily have been avoided. The data was there. Why the landowner didn't investigate it is beyond me, but you know, it does show the importance of using these data sets. I think to bring it slightly back to you know, the home working environment and sort of COVID reaction. I was talking with colleagues yesterday, and we were saying, you know, we grew up in a world and you know, started our careers in a world where everything was paper based, and one had to make written requests for information and go and view, you know, local plans and documents at local authority offices or utility offices. And one of the beauties of data today is the ability to get it at a click of a button wherever you are. So, you know, it really does help to facilitate, you know, working wherever, and flexible working. Touching on one of the points you made about your own office and props, mirroring back to Kathy's talk, I think, you know, quality of office, not quantity, is going to be the key, very much so. So, and you know, I'm seeing investors go back into London, invest in the London office market, but going absolutely for quality. And I suspect a lot of the lower quality offices will, you know, probably end up being converted to housing. And you know, I think overall, you know, from what we've heard, there are challenges for us all in, you know, whatever's coming in whatever format it is. and wherever that may turn up. But for me, I think we need people in our towns and cities. If we don't have people in our towns and cities as we know it and town centres won't survive. Now that doesn't mean people have to work there, but I think they do have to live there and enjoy the environment. And we all have to be part of the system and all of the requisite stakeholders to make that happen. So some great speakers today. So thank you all. I've certainly learned some bits and have some takeaways. Hopefully others have too. Any remaining questions, please put them on the chat. So Sarah, back to you. Thank you.
I'm so pleased actually that I don't have to say very much, because I've only got 4 minutes left, which is great news from my perspective. I can't share my screen because my technology is playing up, but suffice to say, actually, my colleague, bless her, in the background is sharing a screen for me. So we have a whole series of MPs roundtables upcoming. You can see all the details there. I'm not going to read them out one by one because Zoom will cut us off or taser us very shortly. But all that information is on the website or via your account manager individually. And then there's a few webinar. I think this is a webinar as well. Again, can't see very well. Coming up 15th of June. So there's plenty going on in both June, July. In fact, we're already planning for Q3, I think, this week. We have a meeting about it. So do take a look at everything on the website or have a chat with your account manager. But really what I want, I think there's another one coming up. I'm just, oh, there we go. Thank you. Really, I just wanted to say a massive thanks to my speakers today. It's been fascinating. I'm especially pleased, and I don't know if he's still there, I can't see, but I'm especially pleased our CEO was listening in today, and I'm sure he found it valuable, because we as a chamber are having these very same conversations about, how we move back to work, or move back to the office, I should say. So it just remains for me to say thank you again, speakers. I will share the chat box. If there are any other questions from our audience today, and thank you for attending, good turnout, email me directly or I'm sure our speakers will be happy, delighted to hear from you in each individual capacity. Thank you again, guys.